computer. Okay. And now we are recording. Thank you for that reminder. Okay, so once more, we are on the download page.
PowerPoint
You can see that? And Pastor
Yes.
Alan, the question is?
Okay, so now are you in Google Classroom, right?
Was, but here's the Google Classroom.
Okay. Now
You
at that point, then you press the three buttons.
three buttons.
So
You click this.
open new window, right?
And then when you do, it'll open the file in the new window that has other
Right.
tools on it, which is download.
Yeah, right. Okay, all right.
Download. And it will open your hard drive, and it's going to ask you where do you want to save it. Save it in your file, and the rest is.
Okay.
All right. Let me cancel. And by the way, that works on all of your classroom files, right? Any classroom that you have access of, you can actually perform the same method and you will achieve the same result. All right. So now let's go back to our PowerPoint. So we begin by looking at the first 5 books because it is a unit on its own. And if you look at the Hebrew Bible, they name it as Torah, the Torah. Okay, and that title was first used by the Alexandrian translators. If you remember, I told you the story the last time that the Roman Emperor Alexander went to Egypt and made it his home or second home, and also dreamed to build the biggest library in the world. It was at that time that the Jewish people were invited to come in, and also they were commissioned to translate the Hebrew Bible into the common language, which at that time was Greek. And so they used the word, the Torah, or the Pentateuch, I'm sorry, the Pentateuch. Penta meaning 5, all right? And this is was first coined by the Alexandrian translators, namely to assign it to the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Now, if you look at the arrangement of it, it is chronological, historical. The development of theology is also succinct in every parts of this book. The sociological development of the relationship of mankind. From the beginning, there's only 2. By the time you get to Deuteronomy, it is a complex lifestyle. The geographical of it. If you notice, the book of Genesis begins with the crossings of the rivers. And that's the only thing that we know from the Garden of Eden. Genesis chapter 2, I think. Yeah, Genesis chapter 2, verse 14. The great rivers of Tigris and Euphrates, and then also the other 2 in verse 12 and also in verse 13. The river is the Gihon, and then the river of so that's the second river. The first river is Pishon. Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, Euphrates. Now I'm hungry. I was like, food. Okay. So, and then the development of this geography, we were introduced to, by the time we get to Deuteronomy, the cycle of God's covenant have come from Mesopotamia, and then it went to Canaan, and then from Canaan, it went to Egypt, 400 years later, through the wilderness, it went back to Canaan. So a lot of developments in this 5 books, the first unit. The first to meet the canon in Divine Hebrew Bible is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy. And we say that because they are most quoted not just by the New Testament, but they are the most quoted by Old Testament prophets. David quoted Moses many times. Even by the time we get to before the United Kingdom part, which is the Judges part, they were already quoting the scrolls of Moses. They were already quoting Moses and how they need to maintain the lifestyle and the covenants that God had made. So because of these citations, we can be rest assured that the first 5 books was the first canon of the Bible ever um, what's the word I want to use? Accepted by God's people, by the Jewish people. Okay, we did say that it's most quoted by the New Testament, and primary to the three fold division, the law, prophets, and writings, is the law, which is the books of Moses. Books of Moses. Now, of course, in the English Bible, we kind of don't follow the threefold division of the Old Testament. The Hebrew Bible uses these 3: law, prophets, and writings. To us, we better memorize it with 5:12, 5:5:12, namely. No, not the 5 divisions. The 5 divisions, namely.
Pentateuch.
No.
5, 12.
5
5,
books.
5, 12, 5.
Pentateuch. Next 12.
Pentateuch.
Okay. What's the next
History.
one? Okay.
Oh, history.
Historical.
Historical, yes. And then next is prophets, minor, major.
Major, minor.
And minor, right. Okay, good. Yeah, I got 3 out of 5. You got 3 out of 5. Good. So
Pastor Bon, can you explain the threefold division? How is it divided?
oh, how is it divided? Okay.
And Pastor,
Go ahead.
how about the Torah?
The Torah. Yeah.
How come you never say it Torah
Yeah,
or
yeah. It's a proper subject, it's a noun that is normally used by the scribes. Yeah, let me just I'll go ahead and mute your microphone, Randy. Okay, so the use of the Torah is the scribal use. It appeared at the development of the Sadducees and Pharisees prior to the coming of Christ. So that's the Pharisee movement have kind of embraced that term. Now the Hebrew Bible is divided into 3. The law meaning 5. All right. The prophets are consolidated, major and minor, except for poetry. They don't have poetry. Writings are everything else other than the prophets. Okay, so it's not historically arranged. It is more didactic in nature. It is there to teach rather than to tell a story from beginning to end, right?
So the sequence of the Hebrew Bible is different from the Christian Bible.
Right, the table of contents is different. The arrangement
Okay,
of
got it.
the Bible, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, I was doing a small group last night. You wouldn't believe this. By the way, we were in Facebook Messenger. We were doing this. And Edito, who's one of the guys that we're ministering to, and by the way, he came to know Jesus a month and a half ago. Praise the Lord for that.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. We said, okay, everybody turn your Bibles to the book of Jonah. And he started turning to the book of Jonah. He goes, how come I could not find it? I said, it's there. He said, what do you see? I see Maccabees, Esdras, Tobit. I said, what Bible is that? And I looked at it, it has the extra canonical, or we call it extra literature, so the Catholic tradition.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
So,
Uh-huh.
so even the Catholic Bible respects the English order of the Old Testament, except that they induce an extra 7 to 12 books in between. Very interesting. I find that very interesting.
Uh-huh.
All right. And let's move on. We have a quiz that we have given to you, which, by the way, closes today. So no need to rush. We are just asked. Okay. Remember that one of the issues of Hill and Walton, and by the way, these are experts on this field, and they have well read, and that's why we respect a lot of their viewpoints. If you notice in your reading, they're not pastoral in their teaching. They're not telling you that Genesis is this and it's God. It's not done in the very devotion way. It is done in an academic way. So in respect to academic, they would always say, and by the way, this is questioned by this field. And so the question on the first 5 books of Moses is basically two theories. The idea that Genesis to Deuteronomy is just a piece by piece books put together with no intent of themes that surrounds it. Meantime, those who contends that it is a single unit and thereby it is cohesive tells us that it is not by accident, it is intently designed that way from Genesis to Deuteronomy. And those that sides on the latter are the evangelicals, the Jewish people, all right, which is this is their Holy Bible. Now those that side on the other are the people who are the critics. Okay, we call them the reconstructionists. In your reading, they have been exposed by our writers. They have preconceived notions that the Bible is just a literature that was written really later than what many theologians and many biblical academic people would say. So in light of that background, my question to you, if you have read the book of Genesis and Deuteronomy, let's see if we just understand this. The question is there a cohesiveness between these first 5 books? The question is, if it is so, what determines that? What do you see in these 5 books that makes it connected to each other? And we contend that there is a literary unity and there is a theological unity. In other words, it was arranged this way. It's not even contending historically, right? The chronological order of it, because by the time you get to Leviticus and part of Deuteronomy, there's really no history in it. It's more of didactic in nature. But if you look at the whole picture as a unit, there seems to be a literary theme and there seems to be a theological theme. All right, so here's what we're going to do. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're going to divide ourselves into groups, and just for the next 5 minutes, I'd like you to discuss this question. Is the Pentateuch a unit in itself or a random collection, or do they really have cohesiveness in this? And if there is so, I want you to discuss among your group the unifying theological or literary themes that you have discovered. Make sense? Yes, no? Okay. All right, let's go to our breakout rooms. I am going to assign the 3 in-house you are together. Okay. And then I will assign okay, I think I have it up. All right, your rooms are open, and go ahead to your discussion rooms. We'll see you in 5 minutes. I'll close the room and force you all back in.
or are they random?
Annie,
Yeah, hi.
I am gonna move you to the other room because
Okay,
there's three
sure.
here and there's only two there.
Okay.
Okay, I'll be right back.
But Bob,
We don't
Yeah.
count.
yeah,
Say again.
We don't count in this discussion. We don't have the book.
Oh, you don't have the book. You know what? Keep the group and let's continue on. I apologize. All right, sorry.
Okay.
Hazel,
Hello po, Pastor.
hey, we are in our breakout rooms right now. I'm gonna move
Yeah.
you to a breakout room. Hang on. Okay. Okay, go ahead, Hazel, and press that button. All right, welcome back. Just waiting for group number 2.
So Pastor Bong, we don't have the controls to put people in breakout rooms, right? Only the host has the controls to do that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Where are you, Annie?
I'm in Japan.
You know, Annie, when I do my video, for
Oh.
some reason, I cannot, it says choose virtual background. So I choose that, but it doesn't give me options of what to do. It says none. So I don't know I mean, I don't know how to get those.
Okay, we'll take that outside the class.
Okay. Okay.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so let's go back to the discussion and let's solicit some of your information. We have people in person. We have 2 other groups online. So who would like to go first? Okay, let's go to the in-person crowd. Unmute your microphone there. Go ahead, unmute your microphone. Gani.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Are we on? Yes, okay, we're on. So we're sharing cameras here and videos. So to the first part of the question, is the Pentateuch a unit in itself, or are they a random collection of early Hebrew literature, and why? So yes, it is a unit in itself. And those who was listening, Pastor Bong did say that at the beginning of class. And the reason why would be they do follow a chronological order. And Pastor just said us, the first 2 books do, and then after that, they kind of don't. And then we're going to let Randy and Danny finish it up.
Yeah. Other than that, when we talk about the Pentateuch, other than that, when we say Pentateuch, the word Penta is 5, and the Teuch is a papyrus, and a lot of usage means scrolls. So this speak about the law, the law of book, the book of Moses.
Exodus.
Yeah. So that it says speak about the canon. Why is it, and why? And I think it's with the principles, and it varies with the principles of their life and their history and the guidance of the word of the promise and command. Okay.
Okay, anything else? That's correct.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in addition to that, as we know, Pentateuch is the instruction of holiness, the law of Moses. And one of the primary purpose of the Pentateuch was to provide covenant with the people of Israel and his laws and instruction for them how to live their life, how to live by. At the same time, by studying the Pentateuch, we learn the origin, purpose, and bearing of God's relationship with Israel. So it's the same thing with us now as a Christian. We need to have a relationship with the Lord. And that's the reason why we study the theology and at the same time the history and the Old and New Testament, so we can relate it together. As we know that on the time that they are God preparing them the promised land until they reach the promised land. And now we are the continuation.
Wow. He was ready to preach for Sunday. I had to hold it down.
Awesome, Gani.
That's right. Okay, thank you. In-person crowd. Let's go to Pastor Allen's group. Pastor Allen, introduce your group mates.
Yeah, we all agree that there is a central theme in the first 5 books. And when you think about it, it goes like from creation, they get expelled from the garden. Then you go into the book of Exodus, they're wandering in the wilderness. Moses comes along, he goes to Mount Sinai, and they get the laws. And so from part of Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers, all have to do with the law. You know, I mean, they state all the laws. And so I think the law is the common theme in those 5 books. But you know, I was looking at our textbook and everything. I can't decide what, or it doesn't come to me what literary genre that the law was written in. It's not wisdom literature. It's not prophecy. So I don't know. Does anybody have a better idea? What when you say genre, I guess what it says, what class of writing is it? Like, poetry, narratives are like, like you tell a story. I don't know, maybe it might be a narrative. It's telling a story of how we got the law. So I'm not sure.
Good point. Good point. This is the same struggle as to why critics are very prominent in their discussion to say that there's no single overarching theme to this, and that the Hebrew and that the Christians are forcing themes into it, which is not too obvious. All right, good point. I'm glad that you caught up with the historicity of it, chronological order of it. Let's go to the next group. June, why don't you introduce your team to us, or Annie, or whoever.
Okay. Okay, so I'll represent our group, and then it's June and Linda and Bill. We felt the same way, that the Pentateuch has a unifying theological theme, and the theme is that God revealed Himself to His people, which is the Israelites, and the point is to restore a broken relationship between a creator and His creation. So Pastor Allen talked about the creation and the fallen man and then being expelled, and and then it went into the law and how to be holy. And I think it doesn't stop there. I think the another key point that it all the books are related is that it the Pentateuch contains instruction in holiness, and God wants to show His people what a good life looks like, and how humankind is not able to self-attain the good life, the holy life, because of the fall. So because of God's character, He is making the provision, and that is like looking into the promised land. He's making provisions to free His people from the bondage of sin, and making covenant with Abraham and also the Israelite people. And so there is the hope also revealed in the 5 books, and we can't figure out how they are related literarily, and that is something that we wanted to raise to you, Pastor Bong.
Okay, good point. I mean, all of your groups have kind of raised the idea that there seemed to be a genre behind it, or a literature unity, but we just can't figure out what specifically it is. The dominance of it is purely narrative, and you've got definitely other books such as Leviticus and Deuteronomy that are more didactic in nature. All right, so does this nullify, however, the cohesiveness of the 5 books? That's a question we can ask.
And that they're attributed to Moses.
And the fact that it's attributed to Moses, yes. And you would find out too that by, I use the word citations, the mere citations of the first 5 books throughout the Judeo and the Christian literature, meaning the part of the Old Testament and the New Testament, you could find that it was not this was not forced by later developments, but rather this was honored by individuals who have the same perceptions. Later on, we're going to find that the medieval times, the history of Pentateuch, and how people have struggled over it. Bottom line is there seemed to be a unity, all right? And your number 1 narrative format is there. And if you follow along where Leviticus and Numbers and part of Deuteronomy falls into, They fall into a big branch of a historical narrative that starts from the Garden of Eden all the way to the death of Moses at Mount Nebo. Okay? Any other questions? All right, let's move on. Okay. Now, when we talked about narratives, there are different kinds of literature or forms. There's the um, prose narrative as opposed to poetry. There's a comedic, heroic, epic, and tragic. Okay, and you would find a combinations of all of these all throughout the first 5 books. For example, a happy ending, Genesis to Deuteronomy. Can you tell me a portion of the Pentateuch that has triumph in it?
Crossing Red Sea.
Sure, the crossing of the Red Sea is more prominent in the book of Exodus. Yes, the promised land, of course, that did not get fulfilled until Joshua, but the fact that they were able to exit out from Egypt, that has the king, the Pharaoh, has a very strong hold on them. All right. How about Abraham and Sarai's? Remember Abram and Sarai at the time where they went to Egypt, and Sarah, in fact, Abraham kind of planned out what to do and say, "Hey, you're my sister, you're not my wife." Okay. See, he was trying to save his skin. He was not trying to save his wife. Happy Valentine's Day, honey. But God turned the situation around, and both of them were saved. And then later on, they would happen that they would have another situation, something similar to this, and yet it has happy endings. Isaac.
Joseph.
Or Joseph.
Joseph.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the ark, yeah?
Sure,
At least
the
there
ark.
was one family. There was a remnant. There was a remnant.
Tragic, and yet comedic in nature. Heroic, meaning that there's one individual or event that triumphs over the struggle, such as Joseph, of course, Moses as well. Epic, it talks about a hero story on a grand scale. And most definitely, Moses comes into this, even though Abraham's calling tops it all too, because out of him,
nations,
the seed
everybody,
of the nations, right? And then tragic.
Stars in the sky.
Right. Okay, let's move on.
Well, that's another one for Joseph, prosperity and catastrophe.
There you go. Yeah.
You know, from the reading from last week, it's kind of like I didn't know that, but you know, it was talking about the Nile River, and you would have periods of time where it rains, and you would have, you know, good vegetation. But then when it didn't rain, it would be kind of like an arid area. And that kind of describes the 7 years of famine and the 7 years of, you know, good crops, kind of like that. So
yeah.
I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, if you look at that cycle of history, we just didn't have the parliament to tell us that there is a weather phenomena. What is the word I'm looking for?
Component.
I'm growing blank.
We have the El Nino and El Nina.
Right,
Pastor.
right. You see, if the politicians in Egypt were there, they would probably pass a stimulus package.
Oh, the global warming, maybe.
Global warming. Thank you, Annie. But anyway, okay, I'm not going there. Stop.
You better stop.
Better stop. Okay, moving on.
At 10 o'clock.
Part of the literary issues of Genesis to Deuteronomy is it's God unveiling himself in many amazing ways. That the fact that man had no way to describe God, they used the language, human language, such as God seeing and God touching. Moses, the writer, Moses, uses the word, and God walks in the coolness of the garden, as if God has pair of legs. But those are called anthropomorphic expression. all right, where we assign human attributes to a godly quality. Then there's also theophany. This is the Greek word theos, God, phaneo, meaning to manifest, a form manifestation. All throughout the Pentateuch, God was manifesting himself in different forms and expressions, such as
Burning bush.
Burning bush.
the burning bush. Yeah, the burning bush. A theophany. Remember, Abraham received 3 strangers
Yeah,
and
the
called
three
them.
angels. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we were doing a daily Bible reading on this. I think, Annie, it was in our class, in our Bible reading plan, or was it in Fil-Am Bible reading plan? Somebody raised that question. Who are these strangers whom Abraham called an angel of the Lord and worshiped them? And the reason why we're not hesitant to declare it as a theophany is because there were attributes only given to a deity, and these strangers did not discourage the act of worship and the fact that they were called angel of the Lord. All right. So theophany is all over the place, from God to Moses. Jacob wrestled with God. That's
Mhm.
an amazing expression.
Mhm.
All right. Okay, and then the narrative structure of the Pentateuch, Hill and Walton kind of elaborates that on page 58 of your reading. Now you notice that in your PowerPoint, this is a clickable link. Yeah, it is a clickable link. I think if you click it, a website will open. And the website, oh, there it is. Okay, let me unshare first the screen.
Yep, I see that.
Yeah, it opens up, right? So if you click that link,
Literary structure of the Pentateuch.
this opens up.
Wow.
Okay. And this is just an extra resource for you guys to use in case you're teaching the book of Genesis to Deuteronomy. It has some literary suggestions. It furthers the discussion, all right, and how to view the book of Genesis. Really enlightening if you look at it. There are many suggestions as to how it could be viewed. The most prominent, of course, is what Hill and Walton puts together, the view of it being covenantal or a promise relationship between God and his people. Let's move on. Another literary feature from Genesis to Deuteronomy is the fact that there is poetry in it, such as the Aaronic benediction. If you remember, during the FSB FPI, that was our topic. And then the Song of Miriam. And then there's also a prophetic genre, and the fact that Moses did this in Deuteronomy. God to Abraham spoke about how God will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. All of them are in poetic literature, or poetic chain. When we say poetic, it comes in different form. I'm not a poet, but the other day, one of our kids in the church was saying it's 575, 575. Haiku. Any one of you familiar with haiku? It is in Polynesian something something, and it's supposed to be a poetry, right? 575. She was telling me 575, and some of these were written in rhythm, in forms of poetry, so which is really interesting. All right. Then also there is a legislative kind of literature, which is law. The time that we see a promise given to Abraham, the use of the law was already common. What are we trying to suggest? We are simply not suggesting that the Bronze Age, where a a subspecies to those that are on the later age, because that's a contention of the evolution theory, that they don't know much. And we're saying that when God made the world, he didn't make an egg, he made a chicken. You know what I'm saying? So there's pretty much a maturity, right? And for Adam to know how to take care of the field, he must know about agriculture, a full-blown idea of how to handle a zoo, right? And quite a brilliant person. So in the same way, when Abraham made a covenant promise, or God made a covenant promise to Abraham, it is not void of what's going on in the culture around it. In Mesopotamia, this was a common thing. Okay, the law or the Torah is being described as commandments, statutes. It gives moral, religious, and ceremonial backing. In fact, during this ancient Near East history, A&E, the covenant law is equivalent to the suzerain and the vassal relationship. The suzerain are the conquerors, and the vassals are the conquered ones. And that they would make a pact that if the vassals would be honoring the suzerains, the people that conquered, that they will adhere to their covenant. And having said that, then, an agreement between God and Abraham is not a later development of social history. This has very common during the Bronze Age. From Exodus chapter 20 to Deuteronomy chapter 33 is pretty much a covenantal law feature that was given to man. So Moses writing this should not be surprising. I think this is where my PowerPoint would stop, but Pentateuch is also a historical book, as many of you contend, all right? Because it follows a story, right? And tell me on the top of your head, we can just skim over the Bible here too, but on the top of your head, tell me the story of a lovely lady. I have to start with who? Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Then next, Cain, Abel, and Seth, right? And we have the prominent genealogies that ends. And then by the time we get to chapter 11, where the world had become populated. By the way, we didn't talk about the Tower of Babel and Noah's Ark in 5, 6, and 7. But these are seem to be, as what Hill and Walton suggest, these seem to be the interruptions to God's covenant. God was pursuing man to come back to him. And then he could not, because there's always an interruption. And what interrupted it is sin in the Garden of Eden. And then the unity nature for which mankind didn't want theocracy to reign over them, God to reign over them, so they want to build their own tower. So God confused them. And then by the time we get to the calling of Abraham, it is God instituting his plan to reach mankind. That makes sense? So between Garden of Eden all the way to Abraham, we see a successive attempt of mankind to try to remedy itself, but all it does was just trying to complicate things. And God sees the sin all over the world, and he destroys the world, saves some, and by the time we get to chapter 12, God enacts his plan. All right? And he calls Abraham. Now, even in the life of Abraham, there was some problems. But you know what? I am going ahead of myself. Why don't we just go talk about Genesis now? Can we do that? Okay. All right. Let's talk about Genesis. What time is it? 7:07. Ooh, we are so ahead of ourselves here. Okay, there it is. All right, let's talk about Genesis. Okay, everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, hang on. My okay. Did you get something? Everybody can hear me?
Yes, Pastor.
There's some echo.
Hang on.
I lost.
Sound test? Can you hear me? Can you give me thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yep, that's good.
Yes, it's good.
Excellent. Thank you. Momentary interruption. Okay, we are in the book of Genesis, and here is Hill and Walton's review of the book. He specifies that there is unity in it by suggesting a theme. All right, and this is how, by the way, is you're going to work your one book assessment of an Old Testament book. You are to come up with your own outline, okay, and come up with your own ideas, the big picture, what is it saying, some purposes statements, some major themes on it. In the major theme that we find in the book of Genesis to Deuteronomy, of course, not just in Genesis, but it was covenant, the fact that God was making a promise to his children. And then also we find an introduction to monotheism, because during the ANE, the ancient Near East, there was multiplicity of deities that was being worshipped. Abraham's God, Yahweh, is quite unique because he is one and monotheist in itself. There's also the introduction of sin and also the introduction of origins. And this is the book of Genesis. Now, if you notice the outline, Hill and Walton embraces an outline of genealogies. From the time of Adam, Noah, Shem, and then he uses the word Toledoth, or the genealogy format. They seem to suggest that the writer was putting a cohesive literary format by using the keyword genealogy. Here's how it began, from God's creation, and then moving on. And by the time we get to the patriarchs, we have Terah, Ishmael, who was a displaced heir of Abraham. Then we get Isaac, the proper recipient of the heir. And then the twins, Esau and then Jacob. And then, of course, you notice that Jacob's genealogy is mentioned as the last in this book. Okay. All right. So that's a good approach. Okay, hang on.
But it's a funny description word that he used, the incubation for the covenant people in Egypt.
In Egypt.
Right. The word incubation for the covenant people. That's what does it mean?
Remember that the story of the Pentateuch is that it was not a straight shot. God wants to fulfill his covenant to his people, but there seemed to be an interruption here and there. We see that from Genesis 3 all the way to 11. Interruptions on the Tower of Babel and Noah's Ark, right? Then by the time Abraham was called, from Abraham until the time of Isaac, and then from Isaac until Joseph, the last patriarch, we noticed too that there were interruptions in between. Now, the word incubation is a very interesting word. you've got to understand that they were nearing an annihilation in a sense of starvation. There was a famine in Palestine, and so it was needful for God's people to be incubated, to be shielded, and to be protected from the from the event that's happening around them. And God orchestrates this miraculously, fabulously, miraculously, because of the fact that He does many things that transpires and releases them after. And I would say part of that miracle is the use of Joseph and the Joseph story, where we realize that there was a reason for this. There was a reason for Joseph to be pseudo murdered by his brothers, and to be sold into slavery, and to be blamed to a crime that he didn't do, and to be passed over from the opportunity that the baker should have given to him. Right? All of these interruptions are actually incubations. God was not, that's right, God was not, these are no incident that God go, oh, I'm shocked. But rather, these are incidents that go, I planned it, just wait and see. So think of that devotionally in your life, and how that makes an impact. Hazel and I were just talking about this a while ago. We were praying for Pastor Daniel. By the way, Hazel, we prayed for Pastor today in our opening. The idea that there seem to be so many interruptions in our lives, and whether that be induced by you, whether that be induced by the world, or it come from the devil himself, some of us act surprised. And in the story of the Pentateuch tells us, don't, because in his time all things will be beautiful. These are not interruptions. These are simply incubations where God is trying to preserve you until, and like what you've said, Annie, until the promised land is delivered to each and every one of us. Well said. All right, now I'm going to challenge you. Now I have you all on the screen. What are some of your suggested outline from the book of Genesis? We're just looking at Genesis, right? Not even knowing the full details of it. What are some of your suggestions? How can you outline Genesis? And to know the outline is to find prominent themes, right? These are your mile markers. I'm going from Mililani, go all the way to Waipahu. And in order for me to get to Waipahu, I need to have a theme. So my major themes would be Mililani, H2 South. And by the time that's point number 1. From H1, merge H1, and then, where was I going? I forgot. Waipahu. And then I will go to H1 East. West. Sorry, we never learned East West in the Philippines. That's why. Okay, so I'm gonna go to East, right? And that's point number 2. And then I will exit on Waikele. That's point number 3. And then destination. That's point number 4. These are my major themes. When you outline a book, you don't outline it on and then a butterfly start flying, and then a white car passed me by. No, those are not major points. Those are sub points of what happened between Mililani exit to H1 West. Okay, so now you are in the freeway of the book of Genesis. You're seeing the story running 120 miles per hour. What are the mile markers? Anyone?
There's several ways, Bong, that you can outline any book. One is by the central figures, like Adam and Noah and Noah's sons and stuff like that, all the way to Joseph to another way to outline them is the major events like creation, the flood, stuff like that.
Sure.
So there's more,
Right. Good point.
There's other ways, I'm sure. Yeah. You could go with theological concepts but those are for all the Old Testament scholars to do.
Let me go to the in-person crowd here. You were gonna say.
You want to, no, kind of like Pastor Ellen just said, you could do it by the topics, the creation, and then Adam and Eve kicked out of the garden, followed by, if I'm not mistaken, the Noah and the flood, and the ark, and so on.
Mhm.
Okay, so you could use events.
You could use events and all of that. Okay. Any others?
You can go, you can
Okay, unmute
outline
your
it by a
microphone.
theme, like the covenant. It started with Abraham.
Oh,
But you wouldn't necessarily focus on creation or Noah and the flood, but the Abrahamic covenant, you could follow that theme along. So
Another good point. Yes. Randy, go ahead.
Okay, so I've seen it on your book, and there's a two categories in it. The universal plot of history of it includes the creation with Adam narratives and the one Noahic narratives. And the second division is the patriarchal history. So it speaks about Abraham narratives, Isaac and Jacob narratives, and Joseph narratives.
Yeah, you guys are getting this. This is good. You guys are gonna ace this class. so really, that's what the test is all about, by the way. When you outline a book, is you try to follow those mile markers, the high events, and then put everything in between. Now, the beautiful thing about this
Pastors, there's an
outline of
echo.
50 chapters. Hang on, Hazel, you gonna say something?
There's an echo.
There's an echo. Hang on. Why do I have an echo? Oh, wait. All right. Okay. No more echo? Okay, good. All right. So the beautiful thing about this outline is simplicity, and it follows keywords. And the keyword here is genealogy, Toledo. Your task as a Bible teacher is to simplify a complicated material. Remember, we are in the it's not Instagram, it's not Facebook.
Twitter.
What kind of generation are we in? 150 characters,
Z.
120 characters? What do you call it?
Twitter.
Twitter. Generation, right? The simpler, the better. Okay. Because if you have students like me who couldn't think at around 7:30 in the evening, despite of drinking 4 cups of coffee, something needs to be more simple than what you're going to do. Your people comes 9 o'clock in the morning. If you're doing Sunday school, 12 to some of you, your church may be in the afternoon, one of the unholy hours of the day. And you teach the book of Genesis and you start talking about Toledos on them. Ay, nako, you're gonna be Toledo, really. Simplify your material, okay? Genesis is a very appealing book, historical, narrative. Find a way. Now, the less major points you have, the better. When you outline it, the less, because there's lesser to remember, right? In fact, even Hill and Walton concedes to say another way to outline this is covenantal. You mentioned that, Pastor Allen. But in the covenantal, it's between Genesis 1 to 11. And then he goes like this, chapters 12 to 50. Right? Yeah, exactly. You know, if I was the professor of these two guys, I would say, that's all you're going to give me? But you know what? They made a case that it's all about covenant and God expressing his covenant. Surprisingly, you will find there are more covenants. There's Noahic covenant and there's Abrahamic covenant. And there is the Garden of Eden covenant, which many do not embrace as a covenant, but it is God telling that this is what's going to happen after. So it's spread up. Even the Jacobian covenant, it was given to Jacob, and then to Joseph. Of course, it's not God telling Joseph, but it was implied, the idea that Joseph did get some blessings from God as well. All right. So anyway, it's really up to you to simplify your outline. Any questions on this outline and your project? None? Let's move on. So who wrote the book of Genesis? No, God did.
God.
No, scribally it is assigned to Moses, yes, and it is for good reasons, and it's not assigned by the medieval commentators, but rather even in an early declaration of history from Ezra, Nehemiah, and even earliest from David, the United Kingdom, and even during the time of Judges. The patriarch Moses had already been recognized as the writer of it. Now, source criticism applies authorship depending on events. So they're saying, how could Moses be the writer if the event is before him? And that's why some of these source criticism, as good of a science they are, could be a Achilles heel to religious academic learning. So what do you do? What do you do? You need to learn how to defend that. Okay, and so when we look at the background of the book, and we're going to develop an argument, but first let's look at the details. Between the first 11 chapters, we find the story, right? And if you have your Bibles, this is a good time to kind of skim over this, because we're not going to deep sea dive. We're just going to scoop. We're just going to snorkel. Between the first 3 chapters, or the first chapter, we have the creation story. By the way, nothing new. You find that too in the common culture of the ANE. There is a common story of creation during the 2000 BC, the Atra and Hassis epic. The flood also has a counterpart discovered in the tablet of Babylonian, the epic of Gilgamesh. So, and the deity recognition of Abraham is nothing new. Monotheism is nothing new, however. All right. So all of these are just to say that Abraham is not an odd culture during the Bronze Age. This was a common culture. Okay. And having said that, then these are not made up beliefs by later writers like Ezra or Nehemiah, or even they even say within the 400 years before the time of Christ is only when Genesis was written, or the book of Genesis was written. And we would argue that it is not so, because creation is a common story according to archaeology, according to the sciences that have discovered such stories. Now, of course, while that argument is good on our behalf, that argument is also bad in our behalf. Why is that? Okay, the question is, we're saying that the story of creation, Noah's Ark, the monotheistic view of Abraham, and all of these are not new trends during the time of Abraham. Because archaeology tells us that creation story was already being populated in the times of Mesopotamia during ANE and during Bronze and later Bronze Age. All right. To state that means that creation was not a later development. It was a common story way back then. So to our vantage point, that works. Question: in what way does it work against us, that argument? In what way does the Mesopotamia creation story, the Gilgamesh flood story, the monotheistic approach of some religions during the time of Abraham? In what way is this against our viewpoint and doesn't help our argument?
Would it be that we're copying those other cultures?
Bingo. All right. So this is pretty much the argument. The creation story is mythological during that time, and thereby it varies from one culture to another. And so the argument against to this point is that your Judaistic creation story is just one form of the many. So there is also an argument against it. Even the flood.
Bong.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Bong, I think that what we do in our minds is that we just presume that when Moses was up in the mountain and was face to face with the Lord, that all that happened up there is that the Lord gave him the 10 Commandments. I mean, there was a time he was up in the mountain, and by the time he came down, they had created a golden calf. So I think that that Moses has a lot of time to spend intimately with God to be able to record, and at that time things were not written down; they were in oral tradition, right? To record the story of the creation and Noah and the flood and Abraham. So I think that Moses, he probably didn't write it. He probably didn't pen it. He probably had secretaries to do that. But I think that he was the source of those stories.
Sure. There's no doubt that within our tradition, our viewpoint is a lot more reasonable than compared to some of these viewpoints. And I agree with you on that, Pastor Allen. Thank you. All right. Listen, we're going to take a break. And this is where your 10-minute dessert break comes. If you have not downloaded yet the files, go ahead and do it so that you can put your notes into it. And we'll catch up with you in the next 10 minutes. All right? Come back.
Bong, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Did you give Gani and Hazel their certificates?
No, not yet. Yeah.
Okay. You still have them though.
It's right in front of me.
Good. Okay. As long as you have it.
Yes. In fact, now is the time probably to give this, but Hazel's not here, so there is going to be an ordination council of deacons. Village Park is going to host it in Waipahu. Community Christian Church is going to host it. February 27th, 4 p.m. It's a Saturday here at the church. In person, I think they're going to try to do an online too, but it's a good celebration. I'm thinking, Hazel, if you are available to come out that day, I would like to present these certificates in public during a time of program. And since I cannot get all of you together in a classroom, let's make some special arrangement and use a platform where Brother Gani's church is going to do a program. Hazel, check your February 27th if you don't mind, yeah?
Yes, Pastor.
Thank you.
I can come.
Winner. Hey, we're supposed to be in break. Supposed to do some stretching. Okay, while you're in break, I will forget this. There are some resources that are very old, but very handy. This one? Yeah. Yeah. No. You gonna scan it? Because the files are already in the flash. I'll look over it. Yeah. Not certainly. Yeah. After the class. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Annie's copy came and she goes, "Wow, this is one heavy textbook." So, Brother Gani, I'm going to talk to Pastor Glenn during the ordination. Oh, if I could just squeeze in part of the program, maybe 3 minutes, just to award certificates to oh, no, not to your church. Because I wanted to be that. This one? Yeah. What is that anyway? This is your certificate of completion for 12 hours. I don't want. What's going on? Because it's awarded publicly. No, you don't have to look at the camera. Yeah. Because that's only for paper only. I know. We'll give you the paper. Publicly. Okay. Time is it? 7:33. What did I say? 7:40. Yeah. We are, I think. Yeah, we are. Resources or to witness to for example Mormon, especially the new generation. Yeah. Well, the Mormons are the hardest group to witness to. So you have to use. We call it breaking down pillars one at a time. The idea is when you witness to strong cult movement, you really cannot sway them. So you just pound one truth at a time, kind of putting a pebble on their shoe, kind of make them think, make them rethink. Yeah, you want them to rethink, let them believe. You want them to rethink. Many Mormons who became born again and followed the Lord actually started with that. There are many testimonies on YouTube about Mormons coming to know Jesus. So resources, there are resources that could empower you. CARM, which is the Christian Apologetics Resource Ministry, carm.com. That's in California, and they have many resources there. You can go. They're very highly apologetic, so you won't only find biblical resources, but you'll find scientific. What's the name of it? CARM dot CARM. M. Yeah, M as in Michael. Let me see. Right? Here, carm.org. And they have just tons of resources on how you could defend the faith against cults. And that's the way how I feel with them. Because we used to have they call themselves elders of the Mormon, and they are young. They are college students. But I told them, I said to them, I had the less of okay, let's get ready to come back. Ready, Danny. Come back. Come back. Let me pull out Genesis here. Okay. Okay, everybody, we are in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and as promised, we are just going to survey the book. Culturally, it does tie in to the common trend of ancient Near East. So there is, without a doubt, not a later development, but rather a proper development during the Bronze Age. Okay, so the question to us now is uh, we want to contend that Genesis is not a mythological book, meaning made up by somebody to fashion in their Judaistic perception of monotheistic God. But rather, we're saying that Genesis is a historical book It is not mythological book. Okay. Um, let's see here. Okay. So how to answer the Mesopotamian influence over beginning. So here's some arguments that I kind of combed on Hale and Walton and looked at others. The first one, A and E, meaning the ancient Near East Bronze Age, helps to better understand perspectives. In other words, academic learnings like this or recent discoveries that allows us to understand the time and culture of Abraham and even older or prior to him, they're not a threat. They simply are callers to make us understand what was the history behind the first 11 chapters. The truth is that the Bible affirms Mesopotamian roots. Where did Abraham come from? In Ur, right? That's Mesopotamia right there. And in many places, so we've seen last week's lesson, that there are many interactions between in the Fertile Crescent between Mesopotamia going to the Anatolia side and then Palestinian side and Egypt side. The Bible is all over the place. So geographically speaking, it is um, it is in agreement to the geographical circles during that time. Number three, the background of human authors will closely identify its writings with their culture. What are we trying to say? The very reason why Moses, presumed writer of the book of Genesis, the reason why there is a Mesopotamian bent is because of the fact that he is from that area. He's not going to write anything that's foreign to his culture, number one, nor will he write anything that's foreign to his timeline, historical timeline. It is for that reason that there is an ANE, Mesopotamian Bronze Age kind of feel in the book of Genesis. And lastly, one has to deploy comparative studies in order to appreciate the similarities and the differences of the book of Genesis to its own culture. Like, for example, Noah's Ark. All right. We tell you that Gilgamesh, the epic tablets of Gilgamesh that was discovered in the Babylonian circles, that is dated during Bronze Age, seem to discuss also a Noah's Ark story, but seem to have differences. What are the differences? The type of boat, the length of the flood, the people who were saved. In Gilgamesh, the people that were saved were actually a race rather than 7 people. Landing place of the boat, the outcome for the hero, and the role of the gods, or at least in the Hebrew perspective, the role of God. A and E. So one of the arguments that we say then is this. Why is that a common argument? There's a common source. Okay, here's what they're saying, or here's what we are trying to say. The Gilgamesh Edict writings, the tablets, and then also the other writings seem to have creation stories too. This is biblical right here. Creation stories too, and Noah's writings too. The argument of the critics are, you see, whatever culture you go to, there's already a story, thereby it's a made-up story. The Jewish story is a made-up story. Now, this is the same argument that we use when we do the study of the Q, or we call the Matthew, Luke, and John perspective of where the 3 gospels came from, and we say it came from Mark. We call this the deduction studies, where we say that the creation stories vary, but it does not nullify its historicity. It only meant that there is a common source from where the creation story started from. You getting it? The multiplicity of creation stories in different culture does not negate the historicity of the book of Genesis. It only proves that there is a common source from where all of these came from. And
Hey,
where do you
Bob?
think is a common source? Yes, Pastor Allen, go ahead.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, like your illustration about Mark and how we get and Matthew and Luke probably had Mark in their hands when they were writing. They probably had these other cultures probably had, like you say, the historicity of creation, the flood, and all of that. But it's dependent upon what what your purpose is. Like for the whole thing of Gilgamesh, it may not have been the purpose of the writer may have not been to explain creation. It may have been just he is wanting to entertain people or things like that. So um, we kind of think that all these creation stories are like trying to explain creation, but that might not necessarily be so with all these different writers.
Sure, sure. I wish we know more about the nature of those other writings. But I think the
Right.
most common argument to all of this, we can be rest assured that if there are multiplicity of stories, that does not negate the historicity of that story.
Right.
Now, any archaeologist or any science would tell you that the only reason why there's multiplicity, it leads to the credence that there is a source, and so we contend to the fact that the source would be the creation, Judeo creation story in the book of Genesis.
Right.
Right? Good point, Pastor. Wish we know more, but we'll move on. Okay, does that make sense? You see the arguments on those? Okay, let's move on. The purpose of the writing of the book of Genesis. It is there to introduce the monotheistic view of God. God introduced himself. We also understand that the role of people uh, was also specified in the fact that God made Adam to manage paradise. Uh, God was sovereign and was pursuing his people. These are the common purposes of the writing of the book of Genesis. Man was constantly failing. We see that over and over, right? God will call and man will fall. Testament of that is the Noah's Ark. We see that the Tower of Babel. In the time of Abraham, we see that Abraham failing to believe the promise. And then by the time that Jacob would receive a promise from the Lord, even Jacob would be very hesitant to see the fulfillment of it, because remember, Jacob by nature was not godly. What was his common character?
Deception.
Deceitful.
That's right. Deception.
Deceit.
Did you say, Hazel, sinful?
Deceitful.
Deceitful, yes. Deception, deceitful. Remember, at his mother's womb, he was already trying to steal the birthright of Esau. So even we're saying that the writer was actually trying to build a story here. That in the first 11 chapters, you see the hang-ups. By the time we come now to Isaac, Abraham and Isaac, until the last chapter, chapter 50, the hang-up was really pronounced, was well pronounced, because now God was no longer working with a righteous man named Abraham, but now he is working through a sinful man named Jacob. Right? What is more pronounced here is, of course, the grace of God. Geography is another purpose to remind us that God is not limited, that he calls people from everywhere, right? That's why testament of the story of Abraham coming from Ur to Canaan and ending up in Egypt is a testament of Christ himself, where he says, go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. Sociological message, it talks about relationships. The polemical message, it is there to prove that the Hebrewic God, Yahweh, is the God and not the A-N-E God. And finally, the theological message of the relationship between God and his creation, the promise, the covenant pronounced well in the life of Abraham. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, let's look at the first two chapters here. Okay. How do we know that there was a literary format? Because if you look at Genesis chapter 1, there is a recurrence of keywords, Toledo, all throughout the book, but just in chapter 1, you notice the rhythm in it, such as in verse 3, and so was the first day. And then the writer goes on verse 8 of chapter 1, and there was the second day. And then in verse 13, and so was the third day. And fourth day in verse 19. What are we trying to say? That is a mind of a writer, right? So there is a literary design to all of this. Even though he was not explaining everything that was happening, he was relating what was happening in a poetic way. And by the way, the phrase says in verse 4, God saw that it was good, right? And then God saw that it was good again in verse 10. And then God saw it was good again in verse 18. And then in verse 21. And then in verse 25. And when he made man, verse 31, he no longer said it was good. He said it was very good.
Very good.
I like that. It was very good.
Very good. Yeah.
All right. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Back when the Pharaoh of Egypt was talking, so it'd be written. That's what it sounds like. So on the third day, like it is written already.
Yeah. So what Danny was saying is, it sounds like I see the same pattern in what story?
Pharaoh, Prince of Egypt.
Right. When Moses was telling the plagues, or when Moses was recording the plagues and how he was doing it in front of the Pharaoh, there was a rhythm to it, and there was a process to it. In the same way, you see the same process here. Good eyes. Good eyes. All right. So this is not just Moses sitting down and listening to God say, God, what did you say? And then he writes it. No. This was processed by the writer himself to make it appealing, and at the same time to make it academic in nature. All right. The first 3 days, the fact that there was a basic function, time, weather, vegetation. The last 3 days, there was an order to it, perfectly suited for inhabited. This is what creation tells us. This is the theme that dominates us, and it also introduces in a monotheistic way. What can we find out in the primeval history? When we say primeval history, we're looking at the patriarch. The word patriarch means pateros, or the idea is the father. When we say matriarch, right, maternal, came from the Greek word mother. Now, patriarch, we're saying that these are the early fathers of the Jewish faith. Can you name me some?
Abraham,
Isaac, Jacob. You could probably include Joseph there. The whole idea is God isolated these men to begin and form and populate his covenant into them. All right. And that's why we're saying Joseph is not, because Joseph, by virtue of citation, was not even cited by any of the New Testament writers. It's always the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. There you go.
I read somewhere the reason why that pattern is in the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's because it takes 3 generations to formulate an ethnicity. I thought that was interesting.
I like that. Yeah. Woo! Beautiful.
Yeah.
Unmute your microphone. Okay, Ghani is gonna say.
and at the same time, we can see in the New Testament where Lord Jesus said, I am the father of Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham at the same time. So we know that God was there from the beginning until the New Testament.
Okay, I think that was in reference to the I am phrase when Jesus mentioned the word I am, claiming the very title of Yahweh that Moses heard in Exodus 3. Okay, good point. So you see these recurrences and you see this, you see all of these portrayals. The book of Genesis is very powerful in that sense. Okay, during the patriarchs, from chapters 2 to chapter 11, you have the status change from sinlessness to sinfulness. You have the degeneration, not just generation, but the degeneration of humanity. Adam's one sin to murder in Cain. How do you get that divide within generations? Within a close generation, how do you multiply sin from one generation to another when the parents just disobeyed and the son becomes a killer? The reason I say this is because normally children learn their behaviors from their parents, right? We were doing this Bible study and we were studying Exodus chapter 20, you know, the promises of the Lord in verse 4 all the way to verse 6, where it says that if you keep idols, I will put my curse from the second to the third and fourth generation. Was that it? Fourth generation. God seemed to say, you know what? The worst sin that any family could ever get is on the fourth. Because it'll multiply, it'll multiply, it'll multiply. With Adam, it didn't take that course. And the possibility too is the fact that they live long time. All right, that the ages way back. How long did Adam live? Right, compared to our generation now, that's equivalent to probably 3 or 4 generations. I just answered my question. So here it is. Moving on. The idea that Adam and Eve's sin multiplied in Abraham in Cain's life is telling. Then you've got what else here? You've got Lamech, who was boastful, Noah was violent. All of these are being portrayed by the writer. Okay, flood. It is a God's punishment, but also it is called God's grace because there were 7 lives that were saved there. After the flood, there was renewal. We see the climax, and then we see the degeneration immediately happening. And then the Tower of Babel, which is, it does inspire mankind because it is unlimited. They can go anywhere by building the Tower of Babel, being united. And God said, no, you will be limited. And God has a different plan. And the fact that this happens in chapter 11, the fact that this happens in chapter 11 and Moses, why did I say Moses? Abraham was called in chapter 12, tells you that the writer has a design that he's trying to say. He's trying to say, we all mess it up because we're trying to reach God. Chapter 12, this one's not going to get messed up because now it is God trying to reach us. Nice? Nicely put. Well done. Wonderful. Okay. The patriarchs. We follow the patriarch story from chapter 11 to chapter 37. Whew, this is a lot. And we're just going to, again, look at the mile markers, right? First, we see the Abrahamic covenant in chapter 12, which was also mentioned again in chapter 15. A reiteration. Why? Because Abraham was having doubts on God's promises. What was the promise? What is the Abrahamic covenant in substance?
That God will be their God and they'll be God's children.
Yeah, that
And he
I
had-
will bless the nations, the world, through you, Abraham. Right? That is the promise. What did Abraham do to deserve the call?
Nothing.
Nothing. Yes, he did not. If you look at chapter 12, he was just being introduced in chapter 11, the last 3 verses, by introducing the father Terah. The Toledo was moving on, moving on, moving on. And then the writer stops in chapter 12 to say, by the way, God starts acting by the time Abraham comes into scene. He doesn't even tell us as to what Abraham was, all because, of course, Paul the Apostle speaks about this in the book of Romans to say, Romans 5, it is by faith that righteousness was imputed in Abraham. He obeyed, he believed, and so righteousness was imputed. That we see later on. So there was nothing that Abraham did. Okay, and by the time chapter 12 finishes, we see the covenant being threatened. In what way? Well, Abraham and Sarah being in Egypt is one. Sarah's barrenness is another. You remember that? Sarah didn't even want to believe that she'll gonna get pregnant. Lot was possibly, what the writer is trying to do here is he was introducing a character for which possibly would inherit the heir, or would be the heir to the covenant. All right, and so he introduces Lot, and later on we find that it's not Lot. Eliezer, a faithful servant, we find out later on it's not Eliezer. And then just as their culture was, the wife is able to give her handmaid to the husband.
Abraham.
And when Abraham sleeps with Hagar, she gets pregnant. Ishmael's born. I'm sorry, not yet. By the time Hagar was pregnant, we see a possibility that Ishmael could be the heir. There was Lot, Eliezer, and then we see Ishmael. And then we find out the reiteration of God's promise in chapter 15. God is telling Abraham, no, he will be your own son. Own son. Because even Abraham kind of got confused, right? The 3 visitors came in chapter 18, reiterated this. God confirmed the signs of his power by destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, giving some faith events to Abraham. And when this happened, chapter 21, Isaac was born. Okay. So we see a lot of threats here, right? The divine threats. By the way, when Isaac was born, that didn't say, and so it was history. No. It's not forever, and they were all happily, and all they lived happily ever after. No. When Isaac was born, there was a divine threat. What was a divine threat?
He had a twin.
No, not yet. Isaac still. What was God's command to Abraham to do to Isaac?
To become
To kill.
to kill him.
To kill his son. Right. Which was, by the way, a very interesting passage to teach in Sunday school or to preach, because, boy, you know, when I preach, I look at the emotions behind it, right? I try to describe it, and I could imagine a father being commanded by a whisper of a voice that I've heard maybe 40 years ago, the same voice that have guided me all throughout, now telling me, I'm going to kill your dream. Wow. You could imagine the turmoil that was going on in Abraham's side. Chapter 22 was not fully described to us emotionally. This is not like a Jonah book. Jonah book has a lot of emotions in it. Book of Psalms, a lot of emotions in it, right? Moses, he was just writing the details because he wants to get to the point. And what is the point? A covenant. That's the point. The human drama is just a sub-point to the main point, right? And the main point is God trying to accomplish to reach mankind. So Abraham was tested, and then again a divine threat. And then we saw the threat comes now after Isaac, because Isaac had twins. We all thought when you were reading from Genesis chapter 25,
24.
yeah,
to 36.
24, 25. By the time you get to 26, you would think it was Esau that's going to get the blessing here, right? Until you turn to 27, and Jacob does something that's spectacular that even God himself, in his divine way, affirmed. Uh, and just as Jacob is very sinful, he continues on this lifestyle, but then he finds grace upon grace when Esau shows up, and we find that in chapter 32, and then he wrestles God, and finally gets his storyline complete in chapter 33 with his brother, making up and releasing him from his offenses in the past. So again, God's very victorious in fulfilling his covenant through Abraham's loins, coming out through Jacob. But then we still have some hang-ups that happens here. Why? Because in between now until the time Jacob would be buried back to Canaan, we find the human drama, and wondering how is God going to fulfill now his covenant to Abraham. You've got a sister being raped. We've got brothers killing brothers. We've got lie and murders, conniving before Jacob, before the father, before the patriarch. And yet, God seemed to have a way to turn back the story to say, what I planned shall be fulfilled. No matter how much humanity tries to destroy it, I will always have the triumph in all of this. And so we see this. We see this in the last few chapters where Joseph keeps the children of Israel incubated for, is it 400 years, Pastor Allen? Or is it 40 years?
Okay, 400 years was when, how long the Israelites were slaves in Egypt.
Got it.
So, I don't know.
Yeah. So we'll just borrow that language and say, and that God was perfecting. Let's use the word incubation now, Annie. And God was incubating, surrogated. They were not supposed to be there. They're supposed to be in Canaan. God's supposed to display his. And let me tell you, some of the theories that come about here as to why they were incubated there for 400 years. The land of Canaan was not ready yet. The children of Israel was not even ready too. They were not prepared and ready. If you look at the life of Jacob and the sons, they were fighting with each other. God could not put a nation from a divided family ties, right? So what did God do? He pauses for 400 years to perfect and bring about the right person. And of course, we see this even when Moses came into the picture. Moses didn't even make it, right? He didn't even get to graduate at the promised land. He just got into the gate and got buried in Mount Nebo. So the book of Genesis is very telling in all of this. The covenant became the centerpiece of the Israelite theology because it was Abraham. All right, Annie, go ahead.
Can we go back to slide 11 and the second to the last bullet point that says Eliezer can would have been another heir. Can you elaborate on that?
Go ahead, Pastor Allen.
Okay. Okay, so So when God told Abraham that you're going to be, the father of many descendants, right? Um, Abraham's oldest servant, Eliezer, Abraham was saying, okay, and the culture of that time was, if he couldn't have any descendants, that means he had no sons. So all of
Oh,
his
yes. Okay, got it.
wealth, yeah, went to the. Now, what's interesting about Eliezer is that he will be the person that Abraham commissions to go and find a wife for Isaac. I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yes, now that rings a bell. Thank you.
And the fact that all of this is not an intimation from the writer. These are the lines of Abraham himself, trying to figure out how God's going to fulfill his promise to him. The wordings are very telling. It says in chapter 15, verse 2, but Abraham said, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me now, since I remain childless and I'm about to die? Who will inherit my estate but Eliezer of Damascus?" And Abraham said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." What does that tell us about us? And what does that tell us about how man is trying to figure this out, while the meantime God is saying, stop, you can't, right? You tried that in Tower of Babel, it didn't work. In Abraham, it's not going to work. You just got to really follow. And by the way, Abraham is a person just like you and I. Yeah. Don't we get ahead of God many times and say, I try to figure this out, only to say,
we want to always try to help God out.
Or help out. Yeah.
Yeah, we know the plan, and it's not going according to your plan. So we'll just help you out here.
That's right, God. You seem to be very slow, so we got to do the work here. Imagine at the age of, is it 99 or 90? Abraham, Sarai gives birth. Boy, I tell you, that lady had it coming, and it was not even pre-Eve that birthing was just a thing of a nothing. No, the sorrow. I don't even know what I'm talking about, but you ladies know. But the thing is that sorrowing in childbirth have already multiplied by this time. And the age doesn't help at all, nor wisdom doesn't help. Only God's grace helps. Okay, so having said that, Annie, that would be it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yep, got it.
Definitely. Okay. Out of the 12 sons, okay, the covenant became the centerpiece. And out of this covenant, we have monotheism being described. There's a discussion about Yahweh and El Shaddai in Exodus chapter 6, verse 2 to 3. The question is, whose God did Abraham worship? All right, because there are two proper names used by Moses, or at least expressed in the burning bush experience. And the answer that we have here is God's name is interchangeable, because in fact, even after this event, God will introduce himself in many other ways. Jehovah Tzidkenu, the righteousness. Jehovah Shammah, God's presence. Jehovah Rapha, God the healer. And I forget the others now. All right. So all of these are not a conflict of personalities nor multiplicity of deity, but rather God's name was interchangeable. And who decides on what will God's name be called? Well, it's not even God. It was the people who were seeing God's manifestation as a preserver. That's why they call it Jehovah Rapha. He healed them during the time of wilderness. It was at the time when God went out his judgment and wiped away all the sinners. And the word Sidkenu was born. And so they called him Jehovah, the righteous one. So it was people who were portraying to God these names.
So, Bong, so, the word Yahweh actually, when it's written, it's only consonants, yeah? And later on, they added the vowels. So, like, this is, Yahweh specifically talks about the name of God. But I think when you say El Shaddai, Jehovah Rapha, and all of that, doesn't it? Isn't it kind of like explaining a characteristic of God or a role that God plays? What do you think?
That's definitely right on, Pastor. It is based on their culture, it is based on their experience, and they emit it towards the deity God. Gani, you're gonna have a comment. Go ahead and unmute your microphone.
Pastor Allen already mentioned, but isn't it Yahweh is a Hebrew word for God, God's name?
So Yahweh is a tetragrammaton. It's four letter syllable without any vowel. The idea is that it's a very precious letters assigning to the I am that I am, the self-existent one. So the issue that we're trying to answer here is the concern of the many critics to say why is, if God is monotheistic, expressed in one form, why does he have many names? And the answer to that is because God's people experiences him in different cultures, in different manners, and in different events and parts of their lives. And that's how they assign these names towards God. And it is not God introducing himself another different name. All right, good point. A good point. Let's move on to the next slide. Yes. There is a song called El Shaddai. I feel like a special number is breaking out, Danny. You ready to sing? Ready? Okay. Okay, moving on. Here is an example of the similarity and the differences, all right, of how these names were mentioned. So it gives you a record of it, and all to verify the fact that this was not God introducing himself in two different names. All right, this is actually God's people assigning him different names by the fact of how he experienced him. So, for example, in Genesis 15, when when Abraham was experiencing God, God was trying to ratify the covenant. So the emphasis is God is a giver, or Yahweh was a giver. Okay, um, and then let me see here. The initiation of agreement happens in Genesis 15. I am El Shaddai, seen on the right column in Genesis 17. So all of these are just to tell you that it is man's experience that dictates their view of God, or their experience of God. So this is not a critical area in a monotheistic viewpoint. Okay. So we not only do we find monotheism, we also see sin, and we also see origins. How was the world made? Through his spoken word, right? Now it's interesting that the Greek culture was not even around when this happened, but later on the Greek culture will have a culture of truth, of which will they call the logos, the totality of truth, logos. John borrows the same concept and then piggybacks on creation to say this Greek culture who embraces logos, the totality or the summation of truth, is actually Jesus. So by typology, you have Genesis, God speaks the word. And then in John chapter 1, Jesus embodies the word. You have a clear connection there of two cultures that are not even remotely close to each other, not even associated with each other, and yet have a cohesiveness in the thematic in nature, right? How long did God made everything? Answer?
6 days.
6 days of creation. On the seventh day, he rested. In what order did he do this? Daddy said Monday.
7th is Sunday, and that's the day we rest.
Okay, Saturday he rested.
Oh, Sunday.
Sunday he rested. Okay. He is a true New
Right?
Testament believer. Okay, then we're gonna
Saturday.
retract that a little
Yeah,
bit.
Saturday.
Yeah, things did change. The common week calendar did change after Christ resurrected. But let's pull back because really the Sabbath or the Sabawath day is actually the 7th day, which is Saturday. All right. And so we're not going to go quickly in that discussion, but only to point out that there were 6 days of creation. The question is, how can God do in 6 days what nature took 5.2 billion years?
His time is not our time.
See, that's a Christian answer. When you're in the apologetics world, those are the kind of answers we try to avoid. Not to say that we don't believe it. It's just to say that your audience is not going to comprehend it. So what would be some theories that came about out of this? So comes now the evolution theory, the idea that the 7 days did not really mean 24 hours. That the 7 days could be length of many years. All right. So what happens when you start jumping into an allegorical interpretation of Genesis? It loses its historicity. That's why it's not either or. We do not embrace theistic evolution because we don't believe in the fact that it is more than 24 hours, or at least by culture we know that a day is a day. Brother Gani is going to speak.
Pastor, isn't it 1 day for the Lord is how many years from us?
All right, he is quoting the book of Peter. And how do you answer that? All right, so here it's true that 1 day, what is 1 day for us is, wait, let me say it again. What's 1 day for
What's
God
1 day for God?
is 1,000.
Could be 1,000 years.
Right, there you go. Okay, so remember, Peter is not talking about creation. So literary speaking, Peter's context was on the fact on waiting on the Lord and when the Lord's day would be. And the idea is God's got his own timing. And what that means is that it is a metaphorical use of time.
So we can use it as a logic.
Well, yeah, because you're gonna run into a lot of problems because when you start interpreting Genesis as metaphorical, allegorical, symbolic in nature, you're opening a can of worms. Yeah. That's why it takes a lot more discipline to study the scripture in a historical, grammatical nature. That's your hermeneutics, as opposed to just, I wonder today what we're going to study. Oh, yeah, we're going to study about Peter and how he thinks. Then you've taken out the boundaries of proper studies, being a proper student of the Word of God. It is become more appealing to do it that way nowadays because people are lazy in studying. And so they bring their own culture to the biblical culture, which is for Moses's intent is maybe 7,000 to 8,000 years from our time. So you cannot migrate Peter's thinking to Moses's thinking. This is not cross-referencing, and it's not a safe hermeneutics interpretation of the book of Genesis. That's why I've been hammering to you that the book of Genesis is not mythological, it is historical. It is not allegorical, therefore its chronological order could be taken as face value. Okay, however, many will contend that the days in the book of Genesis could be more than 1 day. And then also there's a break between Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. All right. So critically speaking, is it possible that God created and then he kind of shambled it and then he made another earth? So all of these wonderful viewpoints, okay, which you will get to ask God when you all go to heaven. Right. Yeah. So don't miss God's theology class when he starts teaching it on Thursday night. That's right. Okay. Hey, boy, we've covered a lot in the book of Genesis, and we will rest our case. Let's go to some time of discussion. Are there any questions or thoughts? Right. The question is, what is A-N-E? Right. That's the academic language that is used to describe the time of Moses. Oh, actually, the time of Abraham. It's not even Abraham. It is the academic nature of the golden era in Mesopotamia years. So they call it ancient Near East. Ancient Near East. So get used to that language because we're going to go to the book of Exodus and other books, and they're going to have their own academic timelines, and we're going to borrow them so that we know how to discuss it to people outside our faith. Amen. All right. Good question. Anyone else? Yes, Ate Al. Go ahead and mute your microphone first.
How can you really appreciate Leviticus and Deuteronomy now? Because when I'm reading the Old Testament, I skip those stuff, because as if I won't get anything out of it, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, because it's just, my mind cannot figure out. It's too much for my mind. So how can you reconcile that? But I know you cannot skip it because otherwise God put it there for a reason, yeah? Because of the law and everything, because of
exactly, yeah.
For history, yeah, for history.
But
well,
not only
me,
that,
right now.
Well, if you follow the reading plan in the U version on 365 days, you would eventually have to read the book of Leviticus, which we are at now. I think we're in Leviticus 6 or 7. So I'm not skipping it. I want to. But that's a good question.
How come?
Go ahead, Annie.
Appreciate, as you read it, how can you really appreciate it, Because they said that every page of the Bible, you can find Jesus in it. Every page, that's one I heard it from a pastor, that in every page of the Bible, you can find Jesus, yeah. But right now, I can still reconcile appreciating Leviticus and Deuteronomy.
All right, anyone who wants
I can read the others, yeah. This is the problem. Exodus, Numbers, you can still get something out of it.
Yeah, because it's historical in nature, right? I see what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Remember now, that's why we call it the law, because by nature it is, there are many ways of which God is trying to create a nation that is separate and unique from the rest of the world. So legislatively, God was, actually it's not even legislation. It's not like I vote, yes, Lord, I agree. But God in his unique mindset legislatively enact all of this. Executive order, I should say. That's right. An executive order coming from God, just telling us, here's how you're going to run life. Now, again, it doesn't excuse us to say, well, how can I get anything from the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy? What are your experiences?
When I look at the book of Deuteronomy, well, Deuteronomy has more narrative than Leviticus, but I'm overwhelmed or just really awed of like Auntie Al and I were talking about the hundreds and hundreds of rules that kind of kind of were things that people had to do, was a way of life, yeah. And how when Jesus comes, all that is done away, in the sense that we don't have to follow these. And these laws were all written from 10, these laws are written so that you wouldn't break the 10 commandments, right? And so I think when I think about Christ, how he freed us from this bondage of knowing all of this. And so it just, some of the things in the Leviticus are laws we follow now, in our judicial code.
Yeah. So if you, anyone else would like to answer? Annie, did you want to say something? And then we're gonna go to Linda after. Hang on. Okay, okay. Let me go with Annie, and then Linda, and then Gani. Okay, Annie, Linda, and Gani. Go ahead, Annie.
Okay. Oh, my experience with Leviticus and Deuteronomy has been similar to Auntie Al. I read it several times, and I cannot remember anything from it after I read it. However, to put myself in the right mindset, like preparing for Sunday school lesson, what I found helpful was going to the Bible Project and watching their 6 or 7 minute video at that they high. It's a high level, presentation of what God is trying to tell His people. And then there's also a 1-page printout of the different sections and how everything's tied together. And I refer to that prior to reading the book, and that has helped. So this is the Bible Project. They have YouTube videos that you can watch beforehand. It gives you a macro view of the book. Maybe that helps. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. And by the way, if you have any of those resources, I know all of us are like teachers at some sort, either small group or our family. We're teaching our family, or Sunday school, or maybe you're a teacher and a preacher. Whatever the case, and if you have resources that could help enlighten the reading of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, such as this, Annie, thank you. Bring that up. And if you have links, if you have, next time, bring it to the class, share it, because you never know. You are helping other people that might be struggling at some points. And let's go to Linda very quickly. Linda.
Another app that I have found really helpful is called Daily Audio Bible. And I've been listening to it since 2015 when Morris Takushi at Nuanu Baptist Church shared it with us when we first joined the church. But this guy, Brian Hardin, he reads the Bible. He reads through the Bible. So you go from Genesis to Revelation in a year. So you start from January 1st through December 31st, and he reads through. And so it's just really helpful. Like he reads portions of the Old Testament, New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. So you get through the whole Bible in a year. And then a lot of times he'll give commentary either before or after the reading. And it really helps to kind of just listen to the actual words of what is in the Bible on a continuous, daily basis, and then to string all of this. So since the 2015, well, actually 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, like I've listened to the Bible read 5 times through, which I never could get through reading the Bible in a year. But this one is like I'm listening to it, and it takes about 30, 40 minutes a day. And then there's in the app, there's also where people share prayer requests or they pray for each other. The reading part, is about maybe 30 minutes. So, if listening helps you, and then with his commentary, a lot of times he'll pull together what's happening and why, like, especially when you get through Leviticus, why all these different rules, just to hear it.
Good point. All right. Thank you, Linda. Gani, go ahead.
I will give one penny Okay, it just because of our, what our books say, the literary plan of Pentateuch about Leviticus, it say that expansion of covenant law for the purpose of holiness among the people of Yahweh, since he will dwell in their midst. And in Deuteronomy, where it's a covenant renewal and second law, giving us preparation for entry into the land of the promise, oh, by the second generation of Yahweh's people. So we know, we can see the plan uh,
Unfolding.
of unfolding. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we've gotten a lot of hints today on how to deal with the Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Approach it historically, and it'll amplify it. Approach it ethically, and it will teach you how man is supposed to behave. Approach it theologically, as it, in a sense, God is unveiling Himself slowly to God's people, and we have no idea, or they have no idea who God was, and so God is trying to do that through the through all of the laws, Levitical laws, and etc. And then, of course, approach it in a way where I forgot the word, but approach it in a way where covenantally, where God is trying to fulfill His promise in Genesis, and these in Leviticus and Deuteronomy are amplifications of that covenant. Remember now, He's no longer dealing with one person. With Abraham, 6 verses, boom. Now you've got 1.2 million people following Yahweh. 6 verses ain't gonna cut it. I mean, yeah. That's why we need this. So in light of that, God has to amplify Himself and be learned by a culture, not just by a person. You see, when God was speaking just to Moses, it was enough for 40 days. But when God was dealing with His nation, it 400 years has to happen. So what are we trying to say? God has a plan, and His plan is going to mature. And as it matures, it is an expression of God's covenant relationship towards His people. So by the time you read the book of Leviticus, it'll give you some basic handles. And might I also add, which is pretty known to our evangelical circle, that when we read the book of Leviticus, we arm ourselves with typology. We look at the premise of the book of Hebrews, where he reflects many of the artifacts of the Old Testament and many of the arrangements, the animal sacrifices, the offerings, the garments, and all of these are a representation of something. Contextually, during their time, there is a representation. But then when we look at it redemptively, we see in the picture of Christ fulfilling all of these. So I know that somehow we have a tendency to say, well, Jesus simplifies it, so I want to keep it simple. I won't read the book. But the truth of the matter is, if Jesus fulfilled it,
otherwise, if it's not important, it won't be there, yeah.
right? But if Jesus fulfilled it, and he even said, the law, what's the wording, Pastor Allen? The law was fulfilled in me. How did he put it? Unmute your microphone, Pastor. Sorry.
He said, I have not come to do away with the law, but I have come to fulfill the law.
Fulfill the law. Right.
Yeah, and not one dot or jittle or whatever will
pass away.
Will pass away until everything is fulfilled.
So if you're a New Testament believer and you adhere to God's words, and Jesus says, I've come to fulfill the law, we need to ask the question, what law?
What is the law?
Right.
Yeah, what's the law?
And guess what? Gonna go back to Leviticus. And then when he says, not even a tittle or a jot shall not, heaven and earth shall not pass away, but the jot and the tittle, they will be there, and I will fulfill that. What in detail is he talking about? And again, it forces us to say Leviticus, Deuteronomy, is something that I need to camp in to fully appreciate what Jesus said in these words. Hey, that's a good, I better write that for the next Sunday school lesson. Beautiful one. Okay. What did you say? Beyond our time. Gotcha, Danny. Gotcha. Okay, anyone else? Okay. Well, listen, we've exhausted our time together. Pastor Allen, you have the privilege of closing us in prayer.
Okay. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for these times that we can fellowship with each other and fellowship around the Word of God. And we just ask you to just help us to process all the things that we learned and heard today, and to help us to have a better understanding of your Word, of the theme that runs through your entire Word, and how each book contributes to that theme.
Amen.
Give us a good night's rest, and we just pray that tomorrow you give us divine opportunities to share the hope that is within us. In
Amen.
Jesus' name we pray. Amen.